Hello everybody and welcome or welcome back to the second shelf and to another video about my project to read the 1001 books I need to read before I die project. You're probably familiar with it, but if you're new, the project was inspired by another booktuber, Sandy from Miss Reads a Lot, who does the 1001 books you need to read before you die, according to these published books that you're familiar with these books. There's 1001 films you need to read before you die, and you have those for books. And I thought that this was a really neat project, but the published versions of these books were like 80% men and 50% white. So I made my own list. And if you're interested in my list, I will leave a link to my Goodreads shelf where all the 1001 books are listed. And there are 3 shelves: the total list, the books that I've read, and the TBR, so the books that I haven't read yet. And the update for now, as of July 1st, is that I have read 403, which leaves 598 still to read. And in June, I read 5 books, and the total for 2022 is 30 books, which is ahead of schedule because my plan is to read 1 a week, so 52 books in a year, which, if you do the math, it will take me more than 10 years to finish the project. Never mind. And each month I film this update in which I talk about the books that I've read, so the June books and the picks for the next month. Enough of the intro. So the 5 books in June that I've read were the first one, and I'm not talking about them at really extensive length because most of them I have been reviewed in other videos. It's just to give you the update. So the first one was a non-fiction book. Oh, and in case you forgot or don't know, my list includes fiction and non-fiction. Most of these books you can buy, the 1001 books you have to read, is fiction, but I included non-fiction. So the nonfiction book in June that I read was a modern classic of nature writing, and that is Annie Dillard's book, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, published in 1974. Annie Dillard, of course, is a very established now American author. This was one of her first books. She was only 27 when she published it, and it's ruminations about nature in her backyard, so to speak, because she lived at that time in Virginia, close to a creek called Tinker Creek, and she just looks at the flora and fauna and long walks and what she discovers there. That part of the book was really good, and I liked it, the way she observes nature, the way she talks about all these little animals and the plants. But the book is not the core of the book is not the nature writing. The core of the book is a theodicy. In other words, the explanation why there is a God, even though there is evil in the world. And as a lot of religious writers do, they take nature as a sort of evidence. That doesn't work for me, but still, I felt the book deserves a place on the list, so I kept it on the list. I mean, I throw out books if I really feel they are very, very bad, but I don't. It doesn't have to be a 5-star or even a 4-star book for me to keep a book on the list. If I feel that this book says something, has significance, then I will keep it on the list, even if I don't love it. So the Annie Dillard is definitely staying on the list. The next one was a possible that made it on the list after I threw out some other book, and that is an Argentinian author, Claudia Pinheiro, Elena Knows, translated from the Spanish by Francis Riddle. Claudia Pinheiro is a contemporary Argentinian author born in 1960 or 61 or something. And this is a book that was longlisted for and maybe even shortly for the Booker International. That's how I came across it, and because even though I really try to be more global with my list, there are definitely more authors from European countries, Asian countries even, and American countries, North American countries. So an Argentinian author that I found was quite an obvious choice for a possible and made it on the list. So Eleanor Knows is the story about Eleanor, who investigates the death of her daughter. Her daughter has been found hanging from a church beam, and the police ruled it a suicide, but Eleanor is convinced that she was murdered. The book takes place in one day when Eleanor sets out to visit an acquaintance. Let's be vague, because she feels that woman could shed some light on the death of her daughter. Eleanor herself is suffering from Parkinson, and the way I felt was especially captured by the way that the author described and the disease and what it meant for Ellen. I thought that was really powerful. And the story is kind of a mystery. Claudia Pinheiro does write mysteries, but it's not a crime novel. So this was my second read. The third, let's check the list. Yes, the third was an Irish debut novel, Edna O'Brien, The Country Girls. This is the trilogy, all three books, but I read the first one called The Country Girls, published in 1960. Edna O'Brien, of course, was born in 1931-ish. I read this together with Kim from Middle of the Book March, and we both really enjoyed it, even though we both also, it's a first novel. And you can see that, especially if you read Edna O'Brien's later work, how crafty she has become and how good she has become in telling stories. And when she set out to write this in published 1960, she wasn't there yet, which I mean is only normal, but it's still a good story. It's about two Irish girls, young women, teenagers when the book opens, until they are almost hitting 20. Kate and her best friend Baba. Baba comes from a quite well-to-do background. Kate comes from a not so well-to-do background, but they're still friends, and they go to school in a convent, and then there's trouble there because they make trouble, and later on they move to Dublin, and they want to have fun and their experiences with men and sex. The book was a scandal in 1960. The way the Catholic Church was talked about, in the convent when they went to convent school, but also the pure fact that these two young girls, young women, had a will of their own, and they wanted to have a life, and they wanted to have fun, and they wanted to have sex. That was not something that Ireland in 1960 thought was a good idea at all. So Edna O'Brien was almost thrown out of the country. I, again, didn't think it was a brilliant book, but it certainly deserved a place on the list, because it tells you something about the time. The book is set after World War II, 1950s in Ireland. It tells you something about that time. And the reaction when it was published also tells you something about the time. That also goes for the fifth and last book I read in June for this project, another buddy read, this time with Courtney from Courtney Ferreter, and we read Plum Bun, a novel without a moral by Jessica Redmond Fossé. This is a Harlem Renaissance author that I hadn't read before. That's how the book made it on the list, published in 1929, and the theme of the book is passing. So you have this family, especially two sisters, Virginia and Angela, a black family, and Angela is very light-skinned and is able to pass as white. And she does that not like her mother, who does it sort of for her own entertainment, but she starts to lead a life as a white woman. She's an artist, she's a painter, and we encounter the difficulties and also the moral dilemmas she is facing because of her choices. Again, I didn't feel it was a brilliant book. It was more about themes and topics like passing or racism, or what you expect from a black artist, from a black person, how that person is expected to lead their life from the black community's point of view, but also, of course, from the racist white society. So the themes were really interesting, but it was theme heavy, and I like a book to be story heavy. So, but still, I definitely deserved a place on my list. So those are the 5 that I read in June. Now, my picks for July. As a non-fiction book, I picked this one, Mahnas Afghani, Women in Exile. When was this published? I'm sorry, 1994. So Afghani is an Iranian author who lives in the US. She was born in the 1940s, and she was forced into exile after the so-called revolution in 1979, when she happened to be in the US. And she has been living in the US ever since. So this is also not a translated work. She writes in English. Obviously, when the book was published in 1994, she has been living in exile for 15 years. Is that true? Yes. And the fact what it means to live in exile was important to her, of her own life, but she also thought it's important to investigate from a feminist point of view. So she talked to 12 other women who happened to have to live in exile. And it's not exile, immigration exile, like I lived in Holland by choice, even though I was born in Germany, but people who were forced to live in another country. So I'm really interested in those stories. And I think Afghani is just, she's herself a very, very interesting person. Then the next book is, let me see, check the publication date, 1979, and that is Carol Churchill, Cloud 9, which is one of the few plays. My list, I have to say, is, from a fiction point of view, novel heavy. So I have very few plays and not that much poetry. But I do have some, and this is Churchill, the author, is an English playwright, and is considered to be, surrealistic, experimental, and I thought that is something that I'm interested to put on the list. The play is set partly, the first act, in an African during colonial time in an African colony, and then 25 years later with the same people in London. So it explores themes like racism, colonialism, but also gender, and it sounded, really interesting. So I hope I made a good pick, and it will stay on the list. The next one is historical fiction, The Scarlet Pimpernel by Baroness Orsi, published in 1905. Baroness Orsi was a Hungarian-British writer. Again, Hungary is a country that I didn't find that many books that are available to me and are translated into English, because I can't read. I wanted to have the list, all the books in English, so they have to be translated into English. And she was one of the Hungarian authors that I found. She was born in the second half of the 19th century. And like I said, this book was published in 1905 and is one of her most famous books. So it's historical fiction set in 1792 during the French Revolution, and it follows a group of people in England who help aristocrats in France to escape. And of course, they are themselves spied upon and followed and by what's his name? A spy master, Chauvelin, who travels to England in order and try to unravel this group. I have no idea. Again, I hope it will stay on the list, and I'll keep you posted. And the last book is translated fiction, and that is Natasha Appenar's novel Waiting for Tomorrow, translated from the French by Geoffrey Strawn, and published in the original in 2015 and the translation in 2018. Natasha Appenar is a Mauritian author, so that is also, me trying to include as many countries as possible on the list. And this book is about a couple. It opens when Anita is waiting for Adam to be released from prison, and we learn about their marriage, their daughter Laura, and then they live in France, and then they hire an illegal immigrant from Mauritius, Adele, and then plot ensues from there. It sounded really interesting. I read long time ago, but in a German translation, a previous book by her, and the title eludes me now, something about the brother, something with the brother in the title. If I remember, I will put it here or in the show notes. But this one is newer and was more easily available to me in English, so I will give this one a try. So these are the books I read in June and the 4 books that I'm planning to read in July. As you know, a lot of times books just jump out at me with no plan, and I will read those. So we will see how many of those 4 I will read, but I will still try to, keep up the pace so that I read a book a week for this challenge. Anyway, this was my update for the 1001 books that I have to read before I die. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, I'm looking forward to your comments, and I'll see you all soon in the next one.